Hello everyone, welcome back. So I've been working for most of this week, as you know, on the Imperium key plate issues of the British Commonwealth, with a special emphasis on Nigeria, which was my strongest colony due to the fact that I collected Nigeria, and a lot of what's been in my auctions over the last 10 years has been all this material I had from this area. So I did a video, my last video gave you the broad brushstrokes overview of these issues from the perspective of Gibbons and their listings. And what I had said in the video was that Gibbons has not done a very good job of the script CA watermark. The listings in Gibbons for the second set of these stamps on that watermark paper are quite superficial. And so I want to show you a number of the things that are not listed in Gibbons, but are very obviously collectible and worth looking into. What my auction shows you for Nigeria could be repeated on virtually any colony that has this design of stamp issue. And so it's a very fruitful field, one you can collect probably for a lifetime, I think, without really running out of things to collect. The other thing I want to look at is some of the plate flaws that I have found. I don't know if they are constant, but I do know that De La Rue had very high standards for quality on their plates. And so plate flaws are not common on De La Rue stamps, and usually when they were occurring, they were quickly corrected. And so it's rare to find a De La Rue key plate with a variety that persists all the way through an issue. This is the reason why seemingly minor frame breaks and flaws in Gibbons are worth so much money, because they were very quickly corrected and they were found, usually. Of course, Gibbons doesn't list anything unless it can be proven constant, and that requires full sheets to be available for study. And for a lot of these colonies and issues, there just aren't very many, if any, full sheets around still. So it's difficult to corroborate the status of these errors, or varieties, I should say, but I think they are all very collectible, and I'm going to show you a few of them in this video. The other thing I'm going to talk about are some of the identification tips for some of the papers, and a few other things that are not immediately apparent from the catalog. So I'm going to start by showing you some of the shade variations that can be found on the script CA and the plate varieties, and then I'll talk about some of the identification issues. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show you a slideshow of, just going to take it out of the, there we go. So this first slide here, okay, shows you 4 examples of the halfpenny green die 1 from the script CA watermark. Now Gibbons describes all 4 of these stamps as green, but you can see quite clearly when you look that the 2 stamps on the left are very different shades from the 2 stamps on the right. The left stamps are what you tend to think of as green, as pure green shade, whereas these are pale bluish green. The other thing you'll note when you look at the top stamp, you can see that the inscriptions here and the key plate here are the same color as the background. Okay, so the way these were printed is occasionally in one operation, both key and duty plates, or I should say head and duty plates, or sometimes in 2 operations. De La Rue was known to do that from time to time in other issues like the George VI, the Palm key plates of the Malayan Federation. And so there's no reason to think they didn't do it here as well. And so here you can see these are the same color, which suggests one operation. But then over here, the Nigeria and the duty plate, this is a lighter green than the background here, which suggests two operations for the printing. The greens over here, this one's darker than this one. And again, both have the same color head and duty plate. And so none of that's listed in Gibbons. And I'm sure, from the used stamps that I handle, there's more variations than that. So I'm just going to go, that's the wrong direction, I'm going this way. So here's a plate flaw. It's not the greatest focus, but it's good enough to show the difference here. So if you look at here, we've got this large white dot, okay, on this floor, on this curly Q here. If you look over here, normally there shouldn't be any dot here. There's a little dash that appears between the curly Qs here normally, in the space here, and that dash has been largely obliterated over here by this large white blob. And then if you look further on the blob, you can see there's a white line that runs from the blob all the way through the curly Qs. And if you look over here, there's no such line. So that's a major plate flaw that has probably gone over everyone's heads because of where it's located on the stamp. I'm almost certain that that's constant, but it was probably corrected very soon after it was found. Okay, so here, now this is another aspect to this issue that I want to go in, and that's booklet stamps. So Gibbons lists complete booklets of all its issues. And if you look at most of the colonies, you see extremely high prices for the booklets, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pounds a booklet for stamps that if they were not in the booklet would catalog, fairly low amounts. And that's because the booklets were a very small portion of the total printing. And of course, most of them didn't survive. But occasionally you do come across single stamps from booklets in accumulations. And unfortunately, again, neither Gibbons nor Scott list them, presumably because they don't feel that they're easily identifiable. But what I'm going to tell you here is that once you know what to look for, they're actually fairly easy. Now, the way that the booklets were produced in those days is that entire sheets of stamps were stapled together along with the interleaving for the booklets and the covers, and then all the booklets were cut apart by guillotine. So what happens is that the perforations on one or sometimes two sides will have been guillotined. Depending on where the guillotine falls, you either get full perfs that have perfectly cut teeth with no unevenness, or you get an edge that's kind of chewed up, again by a guillotine. So, and when you see that, I mean, there is a remote possibility that the stamp is just damaged by scissors. But generally speaking, if you accidentally scissor damage a stamp, your cut is going to be angled and it's not going to be perfectly along one edge. I mean, that's fairly rare. So the way to identify these stamps is to look for guillotine perfs. So if we look at the 1.5 penny orange here, you can see the perfs along the bottom here are partially cut away. And that's a poor guillotining of the bottom edge. So that stamp there comes from the lower row of a pane of 6. Similarly, the stamp over here, you've got guillotined edge on the left, normal perfs everywhere else. So that comes from a booklet that opens on the left side and is from the outer edge of the pane. The 1 penny over here, you've got full perfs at the top, but again, they're perfectly cut all the way across. and guillotine perfs here. So that is a top right stamp from a booklet pane of 6. And so, you know, the booklet singles are much scarcer than the corresponding sheet stamps, and should have a value that is proportionately much higher. Just got to get the light adjusted there so it's not getting in the way of my camera. But yeah, I'm of the opinion that they should be worth quite a bit more, probably $5 to $10 a stamp. And in some cases maybe more with the 2-penny gray, where you know, there's the different dies, and some of them are only found in one booklet. Okay, so here we have another potential plate flaw. We've got, you see over here, there's a large slash through the EV of revenue. Now, that's a chalky paper stamp. There's another slash there. And so one always has to guard against the possibility that that's simply been damaged in the mail and scraped. And the way to look for that typically is to carefully examine the surface, look for evidence of damage to the chalk coating. Usually you'll see jagged edges or areas where it's clearly come away. I didn't see that here. It looks fairly smooth. The stamp doesn't look thinned when I hold it up to the light, so I do think that that's a plate flaw. And if it is, it could potentially be another constant one. But again, there's no listing for that stamp. Okay, so now here we get into the colored papers on the 1 shilling script CA. Now this one is just described as black on green, but as you can see here, we've got 2 wildly different colors for the back of these 2 stamps. The stamp on the right is a clear olive back, whereas the stamp on the left is the typical sort of blue-green, bluish emerald. Now another interesting thing, you probably can't see it in this picture, but if you look very closely at the paper of this stamp, you can see little silk fibers, which one normally sees in granite paper. So for this value only, it would appear to be printed on granite paper, and there's no mention whatsoever in Gibbons of any of these stamps being found on granite paper, but it very clearly is. This is the front of the stamps. Again, you can see completely different front color. That's kind of a pale yellow green or pale yellow olive, and that's your typical green. And again, very different stamps, both described as the same stamp in Gibbons. Also, Gibbons lists it as just black, but you can, if you look carefully, you can see that's black, that's black, that's black, and that's black. But these colors here, these are gray black or very dark gray. They're different colors. And so these stamps were printed by 2 operations and 2 passes through the press, which is not mentioned anywhere in Gibbons. Okay, so here's another picture, a little out of focus again. I had some issues with my camera in getting clear shots, but again, it's not really critical for our purposes here because the differences are wildly apparent. But here's the 2 shilling 6 script CA, all die 2. Again, this stamp is listed as black and red on blue. And if you look, you can see the duty plate here. We've got almost a carmine. There we've got a bright red. And there we have what's nearly scarlet. We've got roughly the same blue here in the paper, but here we've got a deeper, almost Prussian blue. And then in the blacks, I mean, we've got, that's gray black, that's jet black, and that's gray black. So those are three completely different stamps. If those were Bermuda George VI key plates, there would be a separate catalog number for each of those stamps. But again, there's nothing in Gibbons differentiating them. Okay, so that is just an example of a cover. I'm going to get into that on my next video. So I'm just going to turn that around and get into talking about some of the identification issues that occur on the colored papers. So Gibbons lists on the yellow paper, they list yellow with a lemon back, deep yellow with a yellow back. Some of the more simplified listings just refer to yellow. Then they have orange buff back and buff back. Now, if there can be some difficulties in identifying these different colors. So I'm going to try and give you some guidance to help you identify them. Okay, the lemon color in Gibbons always has a greenish tinge to the yellow, and it's kind of an acid yellow. It's an acidic looking yellow color. It's very definitely a pale greenish cast to it, whereas the regular yellow does not have that. So that's what you need to look for if you're deciding whether you have the yellow paper or the lemon paper. The deep yellow paper that Gibbons refers to is always much thicker than the regular paper. And it's a more desirable variety, at least in mint conditions. So you need to know that when you're identifying it. The other one they have is pale yellow, which is a post-war paper. It's quite a creamy yellow. It's very pale, but it's a creamy yellow. So that leaves you with the orange buff and the buff. Now, orange buff is not a color you see very often. It's not really orange. It's kind of a straw color. Buff is, anyway, I should say. Buff is kind of a straw color. It's a creamy brownish yellow. Okay, the main difference between pale yellow and buff is there's a slight brownish tinge to the color. Kind of a mustardy. If you think of Dijon mustard, that would kind of be what buff is for the purpose of these stamps. And then orange buff will be a deeper, slightly orange hue to that color. But it's very easy to mix the two of them up, and frequently you need to have them side by side, or you need to have a fair amount of experience working with them to distinguish them. Cancel dates will help you on used stamps because the pale yellow is typically 1921 and on, and the buff and orange buff papers usually are 1920. So if you have stamps dated before that, they're probably not buff or orange buff. The blue paper doesn't have any listed varieties in Gibbons, although it should, because I've come across, like I've shown you, Prussian blues, gray blues. They describe them as blue universally, but really they're shades of Prussian blue and gray blue, and they're always a dull blue. The front color is generally the same as the back, but occasionally you can find differences. And that's an area that needs to be studied more. Then there's the green paper. So Gibbons lists three basic front colors: green, blue, green, and emerald, with sometimes yellow-green as well. Back colors are listed as pale olive, emerald, and blue-green. So these ones are a little bit easier to identify. The blue-green is fairly self-explanatory. Sometimes it borders more on a shade of blue, like a greenish blue than it is green. It is affected by moisture, so it's common to see, um, if you have a pile of these stamps, to see slight variations in it. The emerald is fairly self-explanatory, though emerald looks more like regular green. It's not really emerald in the way you would think of as like an emerald ring. It's not that kind of green. It's just a basic green. And then the green paper is maybe just a deeper, duller color to the emerald. Pale olive is like it's a very pale, creamy green. Um, it can be difficult to distinguish from the white backs if you don't have experience, but generally the white backs are very white and quite stark. And so a stamp that isn't purely white, that has a slight greenish tinge on the back, is probably a pale olive back. Um, and so those are some tips that to help you identify the different paper colors. Part of the issue with shades on this issue too is that Gibbons doesn't do a really good job of describing the colors. So for instance, the 3-penny stamps on yellow paper are almost always described as being shades of purple, when in reality, at least in my opinion, a lot of times they are combinations of purple brown and chocolate brown. There are some dull grayish purples and some dull purples, but there is a lot of brown on those stamps when they're being described as purple. Likewise, um, there's different shades of when you get into the 6-penny violets and purples. They tend to use the term violet and purple quite interchangeably. For the most part, many of the stamps are shades of dull purple, and there's a very bright purple bordering on magenta that's found in the duty plates. But there's also plums and brownish purples and many, many, many shades. And so in my auction listings, I try to describe the actual colors the way I see them, not necessarily how Gibbons lists them. But, for sure there's a great deal of study to be done on this issue, because if you look at Fernbank's listings for Nigeria, there are in many cases upwards of 30 printings or more of the low values. And even the high values, like the 6-penny, there's probably a dozen printings of several of the dies. And, none of this stuff is described or parsed out or listed in either Scott or Gibbons. A little brief word on the die types and when they appeared. If you're looking at your stamps, you're going to see that for the earlier part of the 1920s, like 1921, 23, maybe up to 24, you're going to see mostly die 1. Then around mid-1920s, you're going to see everything be die 2. And that'll continue all the way up to about 1931, 32. And then you're going to see it revert back to die 1. There are sometimes as well instances where you can get inter-gutter pairs that contain both dies, indicating that at least in some cases, both dies were employed to produce one sheet of stamps, one pane being one die and one pane being the other die. But then you'll see other inter-pano gutter pairs where they're the same die. So there's a lot to be learned in how the sheets were laid out and how that was dealt with. But that's a quick little pointer on how the dies progressed through time. And, you know, in terms of collecting shades, one thing that will be very helpful is to assemble groups of dated canceled stamps that have obviously not been faded through soaking. And if you look in the auction, you'll see I've put together a number of groups of individual stamps with all the shades described. And that can be very helpful in helping you narrow down what date certain printings were made by comparing your dated copies to your undated ones. So that's good for now. I will discuss in another video collecting the postal history, but thanks you for watching and enjoy. Bye for now.